Завантажується, зараз має з'явитися. Пішло?
Так.
Окей.
Так, можемо починати, правильно?
Так.
Так, звук картинки. So, my greetings to all participants and viewers of our discussion. My name is Serhiy Shapovalov. I am a political analyst at Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Today, we will analyze the current situation on the battlefield and how it will affect both Ukraine's diplomatic efforts to increase international financial and support and defense support for Ukraine, and how it will affect Russia's diplomatic efforts to promote its interests in the international arena. We are holding this event in partnership and with the support of Heinrich Boell Foundation. We are grateful to our partners for their support and for understanding of the need to hold such public events to explain to both Ukrainian and Western audiences what is happening on the battlefield, what tactics Russia is using in the war against Ukraine and the entire democratic world, and what needs to be done to effectively counter Russian aggression. Russia is doing everything possible to spread Russian narratives in the information space and undermine international support for Ukraine. Therefore, it is especially important to work with international audiences, which is why we are holding this event in English. I would like to introduce our honorable speakers. Today, we will be speaking with Hanna Shelest, Security Studies Program Director at Ukrainian Prism, and Editor-in-Chief of UA Ukraine Analytica. Hanna, glad to see you. Thank you for your participation. Also with us today is Mikhailo Samus, Director at New Geopolitics Research Network. Good morning, Mr. Mikhailo. Thank you for your contribution to our discussion. And finally, together with us is Maria Zolkina, Head of Regional Security and Conflict Studies at Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiatives Foundation. So I would like to ask the first question to Mikhailo Samus. Dear Mikhailo, I apologize in advance for quoting Maria Zakharova, but it seems to me that her statement yesterday reflects Russia's aspirations quite well. She said that Russia expects Ukraine's readiness to resume negotiations, taking into account new territorial realities and the situation on the battlefield. However, it seems that Russia's position on the battlefield doesn't allow Russia to dictate its demands to Ukraine and force Ukraine to make territorial concessions. What is your assessment of the balance of forces on the battlefield? Who retains the strategic initiative on the battlefield, and how does this affect the potential negotiating positions of Ukraine and Russia?
Thank you very much for inviting me and having me on this great discussion. Thanks for your question, and not thanks for quoting Ms. Zakharova. But anyway, yeah, these words of Zakharova is absolutely clear, showing us the intentions and position of Russia for now. They trying to create the conditions for negotiation. They trying to press on Western Ukraine for negotiations. Different means, different instruments. It's mostly it's a terroristic and genocide kind of methods like massive missile strikes on civilian infrastructure, which is absolutely against of the rules of war, and of course, especially for 21st century in Europe. But nevertheless, Russia is a terroristic state. It's absolutely obvious, and they use terroristic methods. And very symbolic that they use the weapons from Iran, which is recognized a pretty long time ago that this is a sponsor of terrorism. So I think that talking about the general situation on battlefield, you know that Ukraine since approximately June or July have total strategic initiative conducting successful offensive operations on eastern and southern flank, and I think that we will see very soon next successful developments both on east and south, including of course Kherson and Svatovo. But if we're talking about the Russian intentions, they try to stop Ukrainian abilities and capabilities to defeat Ukrainian group of forces on east and south, to stop these developments because they are losing their territories. They already annexed, actually, and this is directly. Ukraine now is directly destroying Putin's concept of continuing this war, and the situation on battlefield developing absolutely against Putin concept. What we can see now, especially, I could say that very symbolically and very brightly showing the reality not only on battlefield, but totally on geopolitically saying situation regionally and globally. This is situation around grain agreement. I think that Hanna will talk about this, I hope, more concretely. But in general, this situation when Putin trying to use his normal tactics of blackmail, and suddenly nobody react on it. And it was kind of Erdogan, when Erdogan told us, okay, you could be out of this agreement, but we will continue. It means that Russia is absolutely extremely fast losing its influence even in Black Sea region. I'm not talking about global level. We will see actually what will happen on the G20 meeting around Russia. I think it will be another step toward showing Putin his real place in this planet. So I think that on battlefield, we will have intentions of Ukrainian armed forces to continue to keep strategic initiative and continue these successful offensive operations without any kind of taking in consideration what Putin or Zakharova think about it. If we're talking about Russian position, you're absolutely right that Russia is trying to fix situation on battlefield, trying to fix territorial situation for now. I mean that annexed territories, and do not allow Ukrainian forces to deliberate new territories of Ukrainian sovereign territory, and do not allow Ukraine to show that Putin is actually out of the situation, cannot stop Ukrainian offensive. And what is very important that I think, of course, Russia, through using these openly terroristic and genocide kind of missile strikes against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, energy, electricity, etc., is trying to organize collapse of energetic system of Ukraine, and to press on Ukrainian leadership and Western leadership to stop fighting. and start to negotiate with Russia before winter how to avoid the worst or the worst case scenario. But I'm sure, and of course, let's say, to move the next military developments to the spring, when Putin and his generals is hoping to collect and concentrate more mobilized troops to organize maybe some new deployments on Belarus territory, to open the northern front, and of course to continue maybe some new strategic stages of this operation on Donbass and maybe even on the south. But I am sure that Ukrainian armed forces is not agree with these plans of Russia, and will continue these successful military operations even during the winter. So now is a dilemma for Putin, continuing try to stop Ukrainian offense or propose new conditions for negotiations, which will be more comfortable and with more advantages for Ukrainian side. We will see. I think it will be something like this. Of course, another option, Russia can get more drones, kamikaze from Iran, more ballistic missiles, and try in December or November, trying to destroy more Ukrainian energy infrastructure. In this case, of course, our Western partners' positions were absolutely critically crucial, important to give us more support and missile defense, and especially against these ballistic missiles, because compared to Shahed, ballistic missiles from Iran will be more and more dangerous for Ukrainian defense system. So I will stop here, and of course I'm ready to answer questions and participate in discussion. Thank you very much.
Can I please ask you one more question? Recently, we have seen several waves of information threats from Russia regarding the possible explosion of the dam of the Kakhovska hydroelectric power plant. We see constant destructive actions of Russia at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Russians are talking about this so-called dirty bomb, or how to say it correctly in English. Moreover, even Medvedev woke up yesterday and began to threaten again to use nuclear weapons if Ukraine liberates its territory. Obviously, Ukraine doesn't react to all these statements, and Ukraine just continues to liberate its territory. But all these statements about potential escalation have impact on Western audiences. Russia is trying to cause fear in the Western countries that if they continue to support Ukraine on the way to Ukraine's victory, Russia will escalate in an unacceptable way. What would you say to the audiences of those countries that support us? How should they respond and react to all these Russian information attacks and threats?
Fortunately, our partners already absolutely clearly understand this absolutely crazy disinformational campaign from Russia, and the best indicator of this, it's answers of Ministry of Defense of three countries when Shoigu called them, and they clearly told that it's impossible, that Ukraine is not going to create dirty bomb. Ukraine is our partner, and of course Ukraine is fighting for this independence and sovereignty. So it's, from my opinion, all of these disinformation campaigns, absolutely crazy disinformation campaign, especially about this Kakhovska gas dump and dirty bomb, because tactical nuclear weapon, Russia actually could use it. It's a terroristic state, so we should understand that it's possible, and the position of our Western partners is it's crucial to stop to use it. But compared to this disinformation about, for example, dirty bomb, I am sure that this is disinformation campaign just to cover its own genocide on missile strikes for civilian infrastructure. So if we compare massive missile strikes and Shahed strikes, drone strikes against Ukrainian energy infrastructure, which is causing and creating the real problems, and it's a real dangerous for Ukrainian society and Ukrainian economy to be literally frozen during the winter. Compared to this, the absolutely crazy stories about dirty bomb is just trying to shift the focus on global informational space, trying to put in informational space these discussions about Ukrainian dirty bomb, but instead of discussion how it's possible that in 21st century the country like Russia can destroy energy infrastructure, which is absolutely not connected to military system of Ukraine. So if we're talking about defense, battlefield, and Ukrainian electricity system, it's absolutely different stuff. And even Russia is trying to explain it that by destroying the Ukrainian electricity system, they have some impact on Ukrainian capabilities on the battlefield. It's absolutely out of reality. So I think it's only trying to shift the attention of and focus of world and Western media and politicians and societies to discuss dirty bomb instead, fantastic dirty bomb, which is absolutely doesn't make sense to use by Ukraine on all territory. It's absolutely out of understanding. And of course, the reality is that Russia is terroristic state using genocide, massive missile strikes on energy infrastructure. So this is, I think, the possible explanation of this situation.
Okay, thank you. And the next question I want to ask to Hanna Shelest. Speaking about the Russian Black Sea fleet and how its role changed since the beginning of the war, for me, as an observer, it seems that there were several consecutive steps to humiliate Russia's naval power in the Black Sea. First, Ukraine liberated Snake Island, and after receiving Harpoon anti-ship missiles, Russian ships can no longer approach the coastline of Ukraine. Next, after the recent drone attack on Russian ships in Sevastopol, it is clear that Russian ships cannot be safe even in their main base. And not even to mention the symbolic importance of the fact that the Russian Black Sea Fleet lost its flagship Moskva, and then Admiral Makarov battleship that was assigned the flagship after that was also damaged. In your opinion, to what extent does the Russian Black Sea Fleet in its current state allow Russia to maintain its role as a significant power in the Black Sea region and dictate Russia's demands during the grain deal?
Thank you for your question. And first of all, I would like to ask us to avoid a little bit of euphoria about those cases of success that you said about Snake Island, Moscow ship, or Sevastopol attack, because we need to understand that that is not a systemic control from our side, but the individual, more of the exceptional cases, unfortunately, as for now. Despite those defeats that the Russian Black Sea Fleet already had, but they are still controlling the Black Sea. And let's be honest, it's not only blocking of the Ukrainian ports, but they have other capabilities that they are de facto controlling our territorial waters, not us. And here we need to understand several things, that when we speak about Navy, we are speaking not only about ships. We're speaking about much bigger configuration of the forces. We're speaking about those missiles that are on those ships. So even if the ship is not capable to go out of the port, it still bears a significant amount of cruise missiles, for example, if we speak about some types of the Russian ships. So if we didn't sink completely, but just damaged a little bit one of the ships, it still can be used for the Navy artillery purposes, for example. Also, let's not forget about the capacities of the Navy aviation that is still in the region. And we are speaking about the reconnaissance or those capacities that they had for the monitoring of the other actions, or the air defense system that some of their bases have. So definitely we're speaking about much bigger capabilities, first of all, than just one ship. What was important, for example, of the Moscow ship, that not just the types of the missiles that they had and that they regularly attacked Ukrainian force, but because it was one of the biggest air defense system for the Russian fleet. So after this, definitely it's limited protection or the defense of the Russian forces. In this way, yes, it was significant. It was important, not just as the flagman, symbolic flagman, but also from losing this capability that allowed Ukrainian forces to make few other actions. But at the same time, let's say, did we get the advantage? Unfortunately, no. We are still in the position that we are defending. We are defending from the Russian ships that are regularly just across Odessa harbor. They are still using both aviation and missiles from the ship, and there are still submarines. Let's not forget that very often for our air defense, the missiles stroke from the Russian submarines in the Black Sea region were really dangerous because it is the last time for us to identify the strike compared to the strike from Crimea or from the board of the ship. That's why definitely we had significant and important both strategically and psychologically victories, but that is the victory of the battle, not the victory of the war. If we speak about the Black Sea territory. The latest attack against Sevastopol, that's something interesting. We understand that that is again the individual case. We cannot say that Ukraine currently have the capabilities to do such attacks regularly. It is very difficult operation, but at the same time, that's brought the new capabilities, demonstrated that Ukraine is able to work with these new type of capabilities that are not so widespread in general in the world. So that is something more for the it's a general warfare, but let's say for the international community to follow how these asymmetrical types can be used. Are they effective? So it seems to me that now we had a testing. We have a time for lessons learned and analysis. Was it effective or not? Was it worth of those efforts that we spent to the damage that we caused with these underwater drones? But at the same time, to understand definitely will we be able to use them further. Definitely, we also after the attack against the Moscow warship, noticed that Russia managed to withdraw part of their Navy ships out of Crimea to a little bit safer place in Novorossiysk. But that also can be temporarily. Because the weather is coming, the winds in Novorossiysk are pretty well known, so-called Novorossiysk bursts. Russians for all these years been discussing about building the proper bursts there, but they haven't finished because they got Crimea, so they decided that is not that way of investment. And that will be a question. Will they return back in a month, let's say, when the weather is spoiling in Novorossiysk and still okay in Crimea? But in general, we understand that what Russia is doing in the Black Sea with its fleet, that for them, as for now, it is less the striking power, but the controlling power. So for them, it is much more important how they can block Ukraine, how they can block others to assist us from the sea, how they can jeopardize our security from the coast. So to bring all those threats for us not to feel safe, not to allow our exports, imports, our maritime activities to jeopardize safety of navigation, rather than considering just as the striking capability for the real fight. The attack from the sea, is it still possible or not? It's not a correct question, because we are speaking about impossibility probably of the landing operation, because that needs much more significant amount of ships, total control of the air and the land support. So that is of those Marines coming, what we saw in the movies against Odessa. Yeah, that's not possible. But still, let's look to the map. There are some places from Crimea or from the occupied part of Kherson region where Russians can make certain operations if they decide to invest these forces against Kherson or Mykolaiv regions. So it's still possible because it is so close, and this possibility exists. Also, the drones that are used from Crimea targeting the certain areas, as for now, that's also the control of the territory that we have. And attack in terms of using missiles, it's still over there. It's just the question of the general capacity of the Russian forces of having these cruise missiles, for example, or other types of the missiles. And that is why I emphasize the other type of the missiles. That's also quite an interesting development from the Russian side that's already for several months. They're using anti-ship missiles against the cities. So Onyx, what is usually should be used against the other ships, Russians are using against Mykolaiv or against Odessa region. That's a demonstrating of their attempts to use all possible ammunition for the purposes they have. So they are also becoming more asymmetric because of the limited capabilities in some periods.
Okay, thank you. And I remember the case when Russians launched missile attack on Kremenchuk. This was with the use of Soviet anti-ship missile, and that is why they struck this shopping mall, because it has the most metal surface. Okay, and one additional question. The day before yesterday, Russia launched a missile strike on the port in Ochakiv. As we know, 2 ships carrying grain were destroyed, and several crew members of these ships were killed. Obviously, Russia is trying to show its importance and the role of an actor who can disrupt this corridor, and that is why all actors involved in this process should take into account Russian position. Was this Russia's terrorist attack reflected in the Western media? Because it's an obvious war crime. And what should be done by Ukraine and Western countries in response to such an attack by Russia?
First of all, we are still lacking the approved information because it's quite strange to talk. As we know, there were ferries, not ships in Achakov, and Achakov never been used for these purposes. So it's still the question what really was there. And as we know, in Achakov is the marine base, so the Russians been attacking this town and this port for all these months. So the question is why they decided to attack these particular 2 ferries. It exists. We don't have a lot of information as for now. And Achakov port has not been used for the grain deal, because in the grain deal, there are 3 ports that is clearly identified. That is Odessa, that is Chernomorsk, and that is Pivdenny. So 3 ports in Odessa region only. Even Mykolaiv port is not included into the grain deal. And that is important to understand. For Russians, even more, when you read the agreement, it is said that the parties take the decision not to attack the port facilities involved in this agreement. Usually when we see port facilities, we understand it as the whole port, meaning the whole infrastructure, not only berths, but administration, terminals, everything. However, if you remember the attack against Odessa port in July, less than 24 hours after the grain deal was signed, Russians' explanations were fantastic because they said, we promised not to attack facilities involved in this agreement, meaning there are those berths for the grain terminal where everything should take place. So if this berth is just 100 meters away, we have a right to attack it. Definitely it was nonsense at that time. It received a lot of criticism, and this criticism was coming because like, okay, but that is the grain terminal and the port administration is 500 meters or 1 kilometer from there. So how you define these port facilities? After this, they started to be a little bit more careful with their explanation. But still, they're very precise about this idea that they're not targeting only those involved in the grain deal. So when we go to Achakov, from the Russian perspective, it is absolutely legitimate target because not involved in the grain deal. Moreover, it is not that type of civilian port for them because it is the military bases over there. It is the base of Marines and they've been attacking again. And we need to understand this logic, and our communication with our partners should be appropriate only with the facts and with the proofs that Russians knew that they are targeting absolutely civilian objects.
Yeah, thank you for this explanation. I think it is important to understand and use in our communications. Thank you, Hanna. Before I give a word to Maria Zolkina, I want to ask everyone who is present here and who watches our discussion to make your comments or questions either in the Zoom chat, or if you watch us on Facebook, you can leave your comment on the Democratic Initiatives Foundation page, and we will check all the comments and questions, and we will ask the participants of our discussion. What about, the next question is to Maria Zolkina. If we talk about the winter is coming, I asked Mikhailo about the situation on the battlefield and who is in the position to make demands or to dictate terms of so-called possible negotiations. What do you think, Maria, about possible steps of Russia? What can they do to change their strategic position in the current military conflict and to force Ukraine to negotiations? What can they do in the coming months?
Thank you, Serhiy. I absolutely agree with the statement given by Mikhailo that Russia is trying to create all the possible conditions, not with positive meaning for Ukraine, let's say, to renew negotiations which were interrupted at the end of March. And when it comes to negotiation strategies or negotiation tactics, let's say, on the side of Russia, I would suggest that we divide between two, let's say, basic or most probable, in my opinion, scenarios when it comes to how Russia will try to implement or what Russia is trying to pursue when it comes to negotiations exactly. So the first basic scenario is that it's basically the status quo with increasing blackmailing practices, including nuclear threats, including any other, let's say, prohibited weapons usage on Ukrainian soil. It's more about continuation of terrorizing civilian population and creating all these conditions for Ukraine to become unlivable space I include here all these attacks on critical infrastructure, this terrorizing of population by suicide drones and other missile attacks all over Ukraine. So basically, this, let's say, first scenario is to drag Ukraine, and mainly not even Ukraine, but persuade, to push our Western partners, and indirectly through the changes of position of our Western partners to drag Ukraine into, let's say, temporary negotiations, to create at least the visibility that something might start or something can start, or even to have some kind of meetings, not high level, but just to broaden, let's say, the scope of contacts between Ukraine and Russia from just grain issues or exchange of prisoners of war towards some more, let's say, political issues. And this kind of, let's say, temporary negotiation format is in the interest of Russia in order to win time before they gather enough resources in terms of personal staff. We know that they declared that they have finished mobilization, that we understand that it will not be finished. These people have to be prepared, sent, settled on specific frontline areas, and the mobilization within Russia will hardly be stopped physically just by declaration of the Kremlin these days. Secondly, they need to win a couple of months, in my opinion, in order to accumulate more military resources. And here the signals about missiles contract with Iran, or for possible, actually alleged supply of some kind of weapons from North Korea to Russia, are part of this, let's say, might be part of this scheme, how Russia tried to accumulate enough resources for these military tactics on the ground to be implemented. And all these, let's say, temporary negotiation efforts to restart negotiations, so to create the illusion that they might start, they are needed just for one, this short-term goal, to win time before Russia is able again in several months to launch another large-scale assault, including one from possibly Belarus territory. But I wouldn't make us concentrate just on, let's say, this temporary vision of negotiations from Russian side. I think that another scenario, or actually another tactic regarding negotiations, or the role of these diplomatic maneuvers with possible beginning of negotiations. The second scenario is also possible. And the second kind of tactics might be to drag Ukraine into longer term negotiation format, like something similar to Normandy format or Minsk trilateral contact group. And I will explain here. This is not a favorable, in my opinion, at this very moment, this is not a favorable scenario for Russia, not priority number one, because still military occupation of Ukraine or serious freezing of their presence in already occupied territories altogether by military means is much more important for them as of now than just diplomatic efforts separately. But there might be some factors or triggers, some developments which might push Russia to change from, using this invitation to negotiations on a short-term basis to, let's say, pushing negotiations for, let's say, much longer period of time. First of all, this trigger or this precondition might be another serious defeat of Russian army on Ukrainian soil, when the prospects of further, let's say, destruction of already existing front line might be more harmful for Russian strategic interests than to go into some, not perspective, but still long, let's say, negotiations. Second factor, which might push Russia to go next year, at the beginning of next year, actually, in favor of this longer format of negotiations, is if the perspective of much more serious weapons supplied to Ukraine will be more realistic than it is now. I mean, something which might be a real game changer on the ground in terms of tanks, in terms of fighter jets, in terms of long-range missiles. So it again might make Russia think what is more what is more favorable for Russia, to conduct military operations with perspective to receive Ukrainian army armed much better with much more serious weapons than we are armed right now, and to be probably defeated on already occupied territories, or to start persuading the West that this is time for a deal. It doesn't mean that Russia will be satisfied with what it will control at that period of time, at that moment of time. But we all understand that there is a difference whether you just send signals through Lavrov, Peskov, or even Putin that we are ready for negotiations, and just at the same time to prepare for another assault. Or if you just concentrate much more seriously on pushing this issue to make a big deal. It doesn't mean that in several months, half year, 1 year, Russia will not be back again to another military assault idea. But it's a different strategy, because what Russia is doing right now, in my opinion, is just really thinking in the perspective of several couple of months and using these invitations for negotiations. Invitations, of course, I say it symbolically here, just as an instrument to win time, to decrease or to slow down the tempos of military supply to Ukraine, of weapons supply to Ukraine. But whether Russia can succeed with this, let's say, tactics, whether it's the short-term approach or vision of role of negotiations or invitations to negotiations, or it's whether it's the second scenario, let's say, with much broader, much broader approach. The problem here for Russia is that there is no chance that Ukrainian authorities, and here I combine both political elites and military staff, will agree to negotiations at this very stage. When it comes to short-term, let's say, negotiation format, we all understand that this is needed for Russia for the reasons I have already mentioned, with winning the time and preparing for another assault. When it comes to longer-term format of negotiations, we understand even better what are the risks. But when it comes to this, let's say, new long Istanbul talks or new political big deal, let's say, which Russia might start pushing forward in case they do not succeed with their other instruments of making Ukraine to concede or to surrender or to restart negotiations. What is risky for us here? That this second scenario with, let's say, a big political deal, not necessarily, but might be more interesting for more actors abroad than it is now. And this is the scenario which Ukraine just simply has to be prepared for, to tackle this development in the very beginning, to explain the after effects, to explain that any kind of a deal, whether temporary or with the illusion that this is a longer term decision, can be constructive and effective in case Ukrainian territory is still occupied. We already see that on the level of political elites, there is no official rhetoric among, let's say, Western community or civilized community, let's say the richest and the most developed part of the world, which is supporting Ukraine. There is no official statements in favor of making a deal at the cost of Ukrainian territory or interest of Ukrainian sovereignty, let's say. But when it comes to the expert level, you might, of course, find lots of offers, proposals, and they will appear more frequently. And here I think that this is just a specific task, not only for official channels of Ukraine to transmit the messages why it's any kind of political deal or political negotiations with Russia are possible for us or will bring the real security or peace in the region. But this is even much more task for us, for Ukrainian experts, to present alternatives, to present counter-arguments, not to wait until this discussion might get more serious, let's say, more serious weight on the West or internationally, let's say. So I don't see any perspective for making a deal with Russia, even if Ukraine will be brought to serious crisis with lack of electricity, water supply, and heating in winter. Secondly, I don't see that Ukraine will react to nuclear threats coming from Russia, and we can maybe speak separately. Why and how should we explain to our international audience? If I may, I can say that, in my opinion, Russia, when Russia tries to scare the international community with possible usage of nuclear weapons against Ukraine, they of course count that it will make everyone start or renew negotiations immediately. But the reaction of Ukraine is opposite, and somehow it's not always understood by international community. So why Ukraine is so resistant even to the threats of the nuclear weapons to be used? And here we have just to explain that, first of all, the concessions in response to the usage of nuclear weapons against Ukraine will be much more serious international precedent than even the usage of nuclear weapons itself. Secondly, the very existence of Ukraine, even not to speak of entire Ukrainian territory, but generally, in case Ukraine concedes somehow or surrenders something politically or territorially in response to this kind of nuclear threats, in a couple of years, Ukraine might disappear as a state, because Russia will simply use the same tactics and try to occupy another part of Ukraine by using the same instrument, blackmailing with possible usage of nuclear threats. And at that moment, Russia will, of course, be able to use it also from Ukraine-occupied territories. And thirdly, that nuclear weapons, regardless of its destruction power, is not the only one weapons which might bring huge destruction and a huge number of casualties. So we shouldn't forget that Russia might not use nuclear weapons, but at the same time, how chemical or biological weapons, for instance, is better. Of course, I say it not straightforwardly in terms of meaning, is better than the usage of nuclear weapons against Ukrainian population, Ukrainian territory. So our arguments here might be also might sound permanently to the international audience to explain, and not to create impression that Ukraine is just resisting from any kind of negotiations. Of course, we understand that we resist because we defend the very idea of Ukrainian territorial integrity and the very existence of Ukrainian nation, Ukrainian people. But when it comes to explanation to foreign audiences, we still have to develop specific arguments to make people, decision makers, expert community, and journalists be persuaded that our position is well argued and constructive.
Thank you, Maria. You answered some of my additional questions beforehand. Just one small question about these expert discussions. We all know that there are so-called pseudo-intellectuals in the West, of course, which are following Russian propaganda, which are often just paid by Russia. But I can also imagine that there are independent experts that have general pro-Ukrainian position, but which they lack experience of dealing with Russia, and that is why it is not obvious for them that Russia will use any temporary peace just to prepare for another attack for Ukraine. What arguments should we present to these people just to persuade them that Russia is not interested in peace anyway? Turn on, please, your microphone.
I will answer very briefly, and I think it will be great to hear the answer to the same question from my colleagues here. Why I always say that what's our goal? So if we understand clearly what's our goal, then we understand what alternatives of, let's say, diplomatic practice or policy making or military resistance is suitable for reaching this goal. If our goal is to restore the territorial integrity of Ukraine, can it be done by diplomatic deal with Russia, by negotiations right now? No. No one will say that Russia is ready to leave already occupied territory voluntarily. So what mean is still in the hands of Ukraine if there is no chance to make a diplomatic settlement, just military means. So that's one answer. Second answer, do we want to receive more secure region after this conflict is finished, or we want just a temporary settlement with some kind of, let's say, bomb which can explode one more time in 1 year, 2 years. If we want more secure Europe, if we want more secure eastern part of Europe, because I mean not only Ukraine, but Poland, Baltic states, then we should not just liberate Ukrainian territory, but we should influence military capacities of Russia and capacities of Russia to offend one more time Ukraine or other, let's say, countries, including EU and NATO member states. How can it be done? As of now, Russia will not go into any kind of demilitarization other way but being defeated on the Ukrainian soil. And thirdly, what is very important also, because still, you know, I feel it, I cannot, of course, prove it by any kind of expert polls, but I still feel it in the air of many expert discussions, that despite the fact that experts are saying that we are in favor of liberation of entire Ukrainian territory, including, of course, Crimea and Donbas, I still think that Crimea is perceived as something negotiable. No one is saying it directly, but I think that if Russia will come out tomorrow and say, we are ready to negotiate, we are ready to withdraw, let's say, just imagine this fantastic scenario, beside of Crimea, I think there will be a serious discussion among Western experts, whether Ukraine should agree with this kind of proposal. That's why we should include also in the set of our arguments that liberation of Crimea, demilitarization of Crimea is inevitable part of making the region secure, because Crimea right now is a military basis from where Russia will launch attacks on Ukraine, on any other Black Sea country, and create unstable situation in Black Sea region, even if we will reach some kind of temporary diplomatic settlement with Russia. So here I finish.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. And I want to ask Hanna and Mikhailo whether you say, whether you see this like positive feedback from Ukraine's partners on the Russian attempts to show that, look, we have flexible position, we are ready for negotiations. So are Western countries persuaded that Russia is an evil that should be fought to the end? Or they are still hoping for some kind of compromise with the existing regime in Russia?
You know, it seems to me there are several aspects in your question. And first of all, about the flexible position, we definitely see that there is no flexible position of the Russian Federation. It has not changed since February. Even when there are statements of Mr. Peskov and Mr. Lavrov that Russia is open for the negotiations, for them, negotiations is the process, not the equivalent to the compromise or to some conclusion. That's why there is no flexible position. Their basic position from what they start, their requirements remained absolutely the same. I would say that some of the hotheads in Moscow even made their request towards Ukraine or towards the West more harsh compared to January, when it was still possible to negotiate something, or even March, because if we remember the Belarus or Istanbul negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, there were some of the possibilities for the compromise. We can discuss separately, was there good compromises, risks just postponed or so on, but it was at least the expressed wish for finding certain solution. As for now, we haven't seen any development. So flexibility is definitely not the word from the Russian tactics. When we speak about our relations with the West and how they perceive, it is not the homogeneous position. Even within one country, we can have those who are still thinking that it is possible to negotiate with Russia, that compromise is possible, that it can be either surrender of Ukraine or even a victory of Ukraine, but with a certain safe face for Mr. Putin or for Russia, or certain concessions. There are numerous variants, and we can hear them still at many of the conferences. Let's be honest that especially often we hear these requests from German politicians of different political parties, from Turkish, from US, from French, from Hungarian. So some of those countries where they always had a little bit softer position regarding the possible claims or the reasoning of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. But at the same time, I absolutely agree with what Maria has been talking about, that we need to understand what is the final goal, because everybody is asking us, what if Ukraine win, or how we see the victory of Ukraine and where that is. And the only thing that I will probably clarify what Maria said, she said territorial integrity. And it seems to me that that is not the best thing to formulate it, because we understand that territory for us, it is people, it is community, it is everything. When we speak with the Western audience about territorial integrity, they are thinking that Ukraine care about each centimeter of the land as something material. That's why I usually formulate it is the restoration of our sovereignty, because that is much more important. It's not about town of X or village of Z or harbor Y. We are speaking about sovereignty of Ukrainian state and of Ukrainian nation, of the ability to take our decision, to have our foreign and domestic policy, not to have Russian intervention, to restore human rights and liberty at the territories that are within the Ukrainian borders. So here, when we speak about borders, we are speaking not about the material, physical borders, but about our space where we have a right to decide what we want. And with this logic, it is sometimes more difficult to speak, because there are still questions about possible neutrality. Luckily, there are less and less. There are still questions to Ukraine about Crimea. But what is interesting, if 5 years ago, everybody was saying, okay, Crimea, yeah, we understand that you need to speak about this publicly, but probably, yeah, that's not in the near future. Now, the positions of our partners or counterparts, better to say, they became a little bit more of the reasonable doubt. They're already asking what will be easier to return Crimea or Donbass? What is more important for Ukraine? Can you agree to this variant or to this variant? So we need to bring more and more of the reasonable doubt into those who are still putting Crimea, for example, or would like to put Crimea out of the discussion as something separately. But can it be negotiations? We always respond, yes, can. The question is about what and from what positions. If Ukraine is coming to the negotiations as the country that can defend itself, that has strong support of our partners, weapons supply, and victories in the battlefield, we are with the stronger position. And then, yes, we can discuss, for example, should Crimea be demilitarized or with some special status, or what it can be? Yep, so that is the question for negotiations, maybe, for some period of time. But if we speak about the negotiations as the way of Ukraine to surrender, to bring ceasefire, but on the account of just freezing and allowing Russian Federation to regroup, that's definitely not the negotiation that the Ukrainian side is ready.
Thank you, Hanna. I also see, I should ask about Mikhailo's reflections on what was said, but I see the raised hand of Yulia Kazdobina. If you don't mind, Mikhailo, I can ask Yulia about her comment or question, and after that, I will give a final word to you to reflect to what was said by Maria and Hanna, and also to a comment of Yulia. Okay? Yeah, Yulia, okay. You're welcome.
I'm sorry, I'm not turning on my camera because I don't have the best lighting in the room. But if I may, I would like to add a little bit to your discussion on like why we, as Ukrainians, why we believe and how we should explain to the European friends why we believe that Russia is not actually getting ready for negotiations. And first of all is like how Russia understands negotiations, right? So we've been watching Putin, we've been watching him for all these years that they were, so to speak, negotiating in the Donbass, and we've seen how they were manipulating the agenda, how they were making demands that were absolutely unacceptable to the Ukrainian side, knowing that Ukraine will never agree to that, and then blaming Ukraine for being disagreeable. And also how they used actually force and raising the stakes before negotiations so that, you know, to force Ukraine into the agreement that was unfavorable to it. And so we're basically observing the same tactic now. They are making absolutely unacceptable demands. Ukraine said from the very beginning that it wants to liberate its entire territory. But when Russia speaks about negotiations, the first thing they do is like, okay, we're ready to negotiate with you, but the question of the territories that we've just captured from you is non-negotiable. So then it becomes absolutely clear that there can be no deal because they're saying that they're not even going to talk about something that's the most important issue for us. And another thing is also to understand that Putin thinks in a pretty systemic ways. I know that, you know, there is this huge discussion whether or not Putin is a strategist. And from the Western point of view, he doesn't look like one, but we need to understand that Putin comes from a totally different context where he is the top dog in the country, where he has the most power. And so he can actually kind of play with his victim and allow his victim to, you know, okay, you're not, I'm not achieving my goal right now, but I still have many options to escalate and to move kind of up the ladder. And I think so. I absolutely agree with Maria that now he is preparing for another assault, because if you look at the things that they're doing, you will see that, of course, it's demobilization, right? Although it's not perfect, and we see all the difficulties that they're facing, but it depends on how the success of the assault is going to depend on how weak or how strong the opposition to it is going to be. So at the same time, we see him trying to shape the environment. So again, shifting to war economy with Russia, in Russia, right? Weakening of Ukraine by the airstrikes and ruining Ukrainian critical infrastructure. So on the one hand, he hopes to break Ukraine's resolve, but on the other hand, he kind of supports the spirit in Russia, right? So they're feeling in Russia like, okay, we're showing those Ukrainians, we're giving them help. The accusations of the dirty bomb, I think they also go into the same kind of framework where they try to keep this belligerent spirit among the Russian population, show that Ukrainians are bad, and so kind of keep them ready to fight Ukraine and disregard all the victims that they're now coming from their front lines. Also weakening for support in the West, right? We've discussed that, how this is happening. And also they're attacking the West. It's the pressure that they're applying in the energy sphere, is the attacks on the internet cables, it's attacks, like it's aggression against like the incidents that were recently seen in Norway. So all of this is meant to intimidate and to send the message to the West that we can hurt you as well if you keep supporting Ukraine, right? Again, then we look into procuring additional drones and missiles from Iran and building up in Belarus. And also there are some information campaigns going around in Belarus. It's anti-Ukrainian smear campaigns claiming that during the Second World War, Ukrainians were killing Belarusians and that there were specific squads to do that. And I'm sure that those campaigns are meant to overcome the resistance that Belarusians don't want to go to war in Ukraine. So those are meant to change their mind. Also, we see that they are speeding up the reconstruction of the Kerch Strait Bridge. They announced initially that it was done that this was going to be finished by July of the next year, and now they say they're going to finish it by December of this year. And we know that Kerch Strait Bridge was used for military supplies to the Russian troops in the south of Ukraine. So I believe that we can listen to all their offers of negotiations, but given what kind of offers they make and given what other things they're doing, there is absolutely no reason to believe that they're serious about negotiations. And if they say negotiations, most likely their view of negotiations is that they make a demand and they make a threat strong enough to intimidate the other party so that the other party just accepts their demands. Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia. Thank you. And dear Mikhailo, your final thoughts on this issue.
Yeah, thank you very much. And of course, I agree with Maria, Hanna, and Yulia about the situation. It's very complicated. And it's very complicated to understand, even for Ukrainians, how to react on this proposition on negotiations. But fortunately, we had a lot of examples. First of all, our Minsk agreements, and we had a Moldova example. We had a Georgian example. So we fortunately, we have a long story of these so-called negotiations with Russia. And we know what does it mean, these negotiations. Talking about the Western position, our allies' positions, this is crucial for us. First of all, it's not the military support from our Western allies. It's not a supportive instrument, but existential instrument for us. It's clear, and of course, Russia understands it's very absolutely clear, and they want to stop this support. They want to avoid this massive supplying for Ukrainian armed forces next generation equipment. If we're talking aircraft, for example, or missile defense, or even armor vehicles, which is developed and designed better than Soviet equipment, or for example missile strikes surface to surface like ATACMS. It will again game changer on the battlefield. But what I like to say to better understand the situation, we always forgetting that now Ukraine is a leader. Ukraine dictate the situation, not only battlefield, but because of Ukrainian armed forces playing the strategic initiative on battlefield, Ukraine as a subject, we dictate on the global arena now the conditions, how and who will dictate negotiations. Again, I remind you the situation about the grain agreement. It's a first time when Russia played this blackmail strategy or tactic, whatever, but it absolutely didn't get any success because Ukraine now play strategic initiative. And this is open up for us a great advantages and great opportunities to create our conditions for negotiations. And of course, another word to understand the situation. Every our friends, every our allies, partners, whatever, they have own national interest. And of course, that I would say that revolutionary, strategic, geopolitical changes what we have now, especially in energy in Europe. It's absolutely against a lot of European oligarchs, who built their businesses for years, for dozens of years, and now Ukraine changed it forever. And of course, they don't want to change it because it will be absolutely different energy. It will be absolutely different business models. And of course, they against it, they opposite it. For them, it will be easier if Ukraine and Russia sit on some table, sign some agreement like Minsk agreement, for example, before, and forget about this and make a business as usual with Russia to make a cheaper energy, to make a cheaper business, to make a normal, very convenient business models and templates. But Ukraine, repeat one very important thing, a victory for us, not only the territorial deliberation or even sovereign on Ukrainian territory, full sovereign of Ukrainian territory, but defeating of Putin regime. We should repeat it before Putin, not only person of Putin, but this regime in Kremlin. It will be dangerous for Ukraine. It will be dangerous for all of Europe, and we need to say to our partners, please forget about the negotiations before Putin in the office. This should be clear for our partners, and they should stop asking, or should publish these articles. Every day we have an article in popular and famous American, European media that Ukraine should, and Western Ukraine should think about negotiations because it's a dangerous nuclear war. Guys, we don't care. We don't care about nuclear war. If you have something to propose, please come to Kyiv and propose to us. But please do not play this game that, okay, Ukraine play so hard, too hard. I saw yesterday the article. Ukraine played too hard that we are on dangerous of nuclear war. Guys, we don't care about your opinion if you're talking about this opinion like this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mikhailo. As General Zaluzhny in his article said, that Russia will remain imminent threat to Ukraine even if we restore the full territorial integrity of Ukraine, because they have rockets that can target their targets, like in several thousands kilometers. So thank you. Thanks to all of you who participated in this discussion, who watched this discussion. I believe we are making an important job of promoting Ukrainian narratives and interests in relations with foreign audiences. As for my final words, one of our viewers commented on our Facebook page, and I will just use his words as my concluding remarks. He said that withdrawing from the occupied territories of Ukraine means the collapse of Putin's regime, so it will be the same result as for the military defeat for Russia. In conclusion, the military operations will decide the fate of each country. End of the quote. Totally agree, and we all will do our best to make our army stronger, make our state stronger, and expel Russian forces from our territory and put an end to this regime that is a threat not only to Ukraine, but to the whole democratic world. Thank you, dear colleagues. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thanks.
Так, що можна стопати рекординг, да? І трансляцію так само. Маш, зупиниш трансляцію?